So, think about the last time you sat in a hospital waiting room. Or, even just a really crowded local clinic.
Oh yeah, with those harsh buzzing fluorescent lights right overhead.
Exactly. And you've got this massive stack of intake forms on a clipboard filled with all that complex, intimidating medical jargon that you're somehow expected to just navigate perfectly.
Right, while you're already not feeling well.
Yeah. And just remember that underlying heavy knot of anxiety sitting right in your stomach. That feeling that your own body has suddenly become this foreign, unpredictable territory.
A horrible feeling.
It really is. And most of us in that exact scenario, we experience this overwhelming urge to just hand our free will over to someone. Anyone, really, as long as they're wearing a white coat.
Just tell me what to do, right?
Exactly. We think that feeling of utter helplessness, that profound vulnerability, is just a natural byproduct of being sick. But what if I told you that this specific sense of panic, that desperate reliance on an external authority to interpret your own biology, isn't an accident of nature at all?
That's a huge question to drop.
I know, but what if that feeling is actually a highly engineered, century-old business strategy?
Yeah, and it is a really difficult concept to confront because, it fundamentally challenges the basic assumptions we hold about the institutions we literally trust with our lives.
Right.
We are so conditioned to view modern centralized healthcare as this purely benevolent evolution of science. But when you really examine the historical and economic architecture of this system, you begin to see that the anxiety you just described, it's actually a structural load-bearing pillar.
Like it's built into the foundation.
Exactly. It's a feature, not a bug.
And uncovering the mechanics behind that structure is our mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at this monumental historical shift in how humanity manages its health. A shift that created profound social inequalities and immense suffering for billions of people worldwide.
It really did reshape the entire globe.
It did. We're going to explore how a doctor-centered approach, one that just labels complex human suffering simply as disease to be managed with patentable chemicals, how that allowed massive investors to hoard just unprecedented wealth and power.
But we aren't just looking at the problem today.
No, definitely not. We are going to deeply examine a radical, decentralized solution created by a whistleblower physician named Dr. Katyali Srivatsa. It's this incredible system using specialized AI and community kiosks to prevent what experts are calling an impending global crisis.
And to do this, we really have to synthesize a very complex web of information today.
We've got a massive stack of sources.
Yeah, we'll be looking at public health policy reports on antimicrobial resistance, dense psychological studies on how anxiety physiologically alters our decision-making, and even the latest research from Stanford and Harvard on the hidden flaws of massive artificial intelligence models.
Plus the profound philosophical writings of Dr. Srivatsa himself. It's a lot. But the way these threads pull together is going to completely change how you view your next doctor's appointment.
Absolutely.
There's a quote, actually, buried in our research materials, attributed to Albert Einstein, that I think just perfectly sets the stakes for what we're about to talk about. He said, "The world will not be destroyed by evil, but by people who watch it without doing anything."
That sentiment right there,
Yeah.
that is the absolute engine of this whole discussion. We are analyzing a medical industrial complex that has operated largely unchallenged for over a century.
100 years of just watching it happen.
Right. The public has essentially been conditioned to watch it happen, to participate in it passively, because they've been systematically stripped of the confidence to question it.
So how did we get here? Like, how did we lose that confidence? Let's trace this back to the roots. I know our sources point heavily to the early 20th century, but I want to understand the actual mechanics of this shift.
Okay, let's go back.
Because before this era, human beings obviously still got sick, right? And they still sought treatment. What was the landscape of healing like before this massive industrial standardization totally took over?
Well, before the turn of the 20th century, the global healthcare landscape was incredibly diverse. It wasn't centralized at all. You had a vast array of healing modalities just operating side by side.
What kind of modalities?
You had traditional healers, herbalists, homeopaths, midwives, and practitioners of ancient systems like Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine.
Okay.
And these were holistic systems. They relied heavily on nature, on generations of empirical observation, and on this deep, intuitive understanding of the local environment.
But I'm guessing a local herbalist who, teaches you how to manage your diet and uses plants from the woods out back, that isn't exactly a very scalable business model for a massive
Oh,
industrialist.
it's precisely the opposite.
Yeah.
It is an economic dead end for a capitalist looking to build a global empire.
Right.
If you look at the historical context provided in our sources, you see this massive intersection of unprecedented industrial wealth and the desire for market monopolization.
We're talking about the Rockefellers here, right?
Exactly. Figures like John D. Rockefeller Sr., his son, and their chief business and philanthropic advisor, Frederick Taylor Gates. They recognized that medicine was this massively fragmented, completely untapped market.
And they had the oil money to tap it.
They possessed the kind of staggering capital generated by the oil and industrial booms, yeah. And they made a conscious, deliberate decision to use that wealth to, quote-unquote, modernize global medicine.
The word modernize does a lot of heavy lifting there, doesn't it?
It really does.
I mean, it implies that everything before it was just primitive or backwards. So how exactly did they achieve this monopolization? You can't just buy out every single herbalist in the world and shut their doors.
No, you don't buy them. You systematically delegitimize them.
Wow. Okay.
His strategy was to aggressively fund and elevate one specific, very nascent branch of medicine, allopathy.
Which is the modern medical model we know today.
Right. The model based on diagnosing specific physical symptoms and attacking them with synthesized, patentable chemicals and invasive procedures.
Patentable being the key word there.
Exactly. Because to secure market dominance for this new chemical-based medical model, the emerging establishment had to eradicate the competition. And the primary mechanism they used was institutional standard setting, combined with massive public relations campaigns that relied really heavily on fear.
Fear of what exactly? Like fear of dying?
Fear of the unknown and fear of being labeled ignorant. The sources describe how traditional holistic healthcare systems were aggressively branded as dangerous quackery.
Just total discredited.
Yeah. By funding specific medical schools and research institutions, this new industrial medical complex gained the ultimate authority to dictate what constituted real science.
So they got to write the rules of the game.
And they conditioned the public over decades to believe that the human body was essentially this flawed, fragile machine. They pushed the narrative that our innate biological signals were totally unreliable and that only these new institutional experts could save us.
Experts armed with highly complex diagnostic equipment and synthesized drugs.
Right. Only they could save us from inevitable decay.
Okay, I have to stop you there for a second because my instinct is to push back on this framing just a bit. It sounds incredibly cynical to view the entire foundation of modern medicine as just a corporate takeover.
It does sound harsh.
Because we cannot ignore the raw data, and our own sources actually present a very strong counter-argument to this. Let's look at the data from the text titled Quantity and Quality of Human Resources.
Okay, let's look at it.
Because this shift towards allopathic industrialized medicine brought about massive, undeniable public health victories in the 20th century.
Well, I am certainly not denying the early epidemiological data. The demographic shifts were profound.
They were staggering. I mean, the text gives this incredibly detailed example of a Chilean woman born in 1910. Her life expectancy at birth was just 33 years.
That's incredibly young.
It is. The mathematical odds were that more than 1 in 3 children born in her cohort would die before reaching their 5th birthday. That is just a horrifying reality.
It's a level of tragedy we can barely comprehend today.
Right. But as this new standardized medical model took hold, bringing with it, mass sanitation, vaccination campaigns, and early antibiotics, her world totally transformed. The infant mortality rate plummeted.
Because children were finally surviving.
Exactly. And by the 1950s, family sizes in Chile naturally dropped to an average of 5.3 children. And in the United States, during the same century, real income increased 6-fold, and life expectancy jumped by an astonishing 25 years.
Almost entirely driven by those sharp declines in mortality.
Right. So if it saved millions of lives and essentially built the modern economy, how can the sources argue that the system is fundamentally broken or unethical?
Because we have to separate the initial public health interventions like clean water, basic sanitation, and early penicillin from the bureaucratic and economic structure that metastasized around them.
Ah, okay. I see the distinction.
The argument in the sources, which is heavily influenced by Dr. Srivatsa's critique, is that while the early victories were completely real, the system became corrupted by its own absolute success.
Success breeding corruption.
And its relentless demand for continuous compounding profit. It shifted from a model of acute healing, like fixing a broken leg or stopping cholera, into a model of chronic disease management.
Managing disease as a lifelong subscription service, essentially.
Yes, the documents detail the creation of what they call the charity trap.
Okay, let's break that concept down. Because on the surface, the word charity implies a pure benefit, right?
Usually, yes.
If a massive philanthropic foundation or a national government is subsidizing medications or building enormous state-of-the-art hospitals and handing out free diagnostic tests to the poor, my brain says that inherently helps the vulnerable. How does that function as a trap?
It functions as a trap of dependency. The texts argue that when a powerful institution provides a quick-fix intervention, usually a patentable pill that merely suppresses a symptom rather than addressing the root cause of the illness, they're not actually empowering that patient.
What are they doing then?
They're conquering the free will of the receiver.
Mm.
Think about the economic logic here. If you genuinely cure a patient, they exit the system.
Right, they don't need you anymore.
Exactly. They're no longer a source of revenue or a justification for bureaucratic funding.
Yeah.
But if you manage their symptoms indefinitely with a drug they must take every single day, they become a permanent dependent customer.
So you're saying the system creates reliance that ensures its own survival? It holds the wealth by ensuring the patient never truly gains medical independence.
Yes, exactly. And the sources use a really fascinating philosophical framework to articulate the ethics of this power dynamic. It's actually drawn from ancient Hindu texts.
Oh, really? How does that connect?
They contrast two opposing types of institutional consciousness. The first is called Rajadharma.
Rajadharma. What does that translate to in a modern governance context?
It represents the sacred ethical duty of leaders, kings, or in our case today, massive healthcare institutions, to protect the public, maintain order, and ensure societal welfare entirely without exploitation.
So leadership with actual integrity.
Under Rajadharma, authority must be exercised with absolute integrity, transparency, and self-control. The ultimate goal is to uplift the citizen so they are strong, capable, and sovereign.
Which heavily implies that the modern medical industrial complex is operating under a very different consciousness.
A drastically different one. The sources argue the current system operates on a Rakshasa consciousness.
Rakshasa.
Yeah, in the ancient text, this is a mindset characterized by insatiable greed, deep-seated self-interest, and the relentless hoarding of wealth and resources at the direct expense of the vulnerable.
Wow.
When you treat citizens as passive, terrified recipients of interventions they don't even understand, you literally strip them of their human sovereignty.
So by building a system where a patient feels they cannot even treat a minor fever without a battery of expensive centralized diagnostic tests, the institution is essentially stealing their free will through the mechanism of panic.
And in this philosophical view, stealing an individual's agency through fear is a direct violation of universal law. It's considered adharma, the total abandonment of ethical duty.
That's a heavy accusation.
It is. The karmic consequence of patronizing or funding this fear-based system, even when it's heavily disguised as public health charity, is that it enforces human bondage. It creates a terrifying social inequality.
Wait, how does it drive inequality specifically, though? Because, don't both the rich and the poor go to hospitals?
They do, but the outcomes are vastly different. The system prioritizes those who can afford continuous, expensive, cutting-edge treatments to manage their chronic conditions. The wealthy can navigate the bureaucracy.
They can pay for the concierge medicine, the second opinions?
Exactly. The poor, meanwhile, are left trapped in underfunded, overcrowded public facilities. They are totally dependent on an authoritarian structure that gives them just enough synthesized chemicals to keep them functional for the labor force, but never enough holistic care to make them truly independent.
Which brings us to a really uncomfortable question. How does the system maintain that level of control over billions of people for a century? Because you can't just use force, right?
No, force is inefficient.
To keep people compliant, to keep them dependent on the institution, you have to engineer their psychology. You have to keep them slightly afraid all the time.
You have to completely sever their trust in their own biology. Dr. Srivatsa refers to this critical loss as the destruction of body literacy.
Body literacy, I like that term.
For millennia, humans survived by intimately understanding the signals of their own bodies. But the modern medical establishment monopolized this knowledge. They walled it off behind incredibly complex jargon, physically intimidating clinical environments, and the constant looming threat of fatal complications.
I want to explore how that fear actually breaks down a human being's ability to think, because there is hard scientific data in our sources about this.
The university study, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at the study published in the International Journal of Eurasian Education and Culture. Let's walk through this methodology, because it is fascinating how clearly it maps to that hospital waiting room scenario we started with.
The study by Chalakadiolu and colleagues. Yes, it provides the actual mathematical proof for how the medical system exploits patient psychology.
Let's look at the mechanics of the study. So they took a sample size of 560 university students, specifically 301 females and 259 males studying at Osmani Korkut Attu University.
Okay.
They administered a psychological tool called the Melbourne Decision-Making Questionnaire, and they cross-referenced the results with scales measuring two specific emotional states, trait anger and trait anxiety.
Right.
Can you explain what trait anxiety actually means in this context? Because it's not just feeling nervous, is it?
No, trait anxiety is very different from situational anxiety. Situational anxiety is feeling nervous right before a job interview or a big test. Trait anxiety is an enduring personality characteristic.
So it's a constant baseline.
Exactly. It's a baseline tendency to perceive the world and its challenges as inherently threatening or dangerous. And the medical system, by constantly emphasizing risk and the fragility of the human body, artificially elevates trait anxiety in the general population.
Okay, so the researchers ran all this data through a multiple regression analysis. What did the math actually prove about how these students made decisions when their anxiety was elevated?
The mathematical models proved unequivocally that high levels of trait anger and trait anxiety are highly significant predictors of negative decision-making styles.
What happens in the brain?
When the human brain is flooded with the neurochemicals of fear and anxiety, the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for logical, deliberative reasoning, is essentially bypassed. It short-circuits.
Wow, so logic just goes out the window.
Yes, and the individual defaults to one of three specific, highly flawed coping mechanisms.
Well, let's break down those three mechanisms, because I see them every time someone talks about a health scare. The first one the study identifies is buck passing.
Buck passing is exactly what it sounds like. It is the complete avoidance of responsibility.
It's handing it off.
The anxiety of making a wrong choice is so overwhelming that the individual simply shifts the entire burden of the decision onto someone else.
This is the patient in the clinic. They are so panicked by the complex medical terminology, by the possibility that their headache is a brain tumor, that they just look at the doctor and say, I don't know, you're the expert, just tell me what to do.
Do whatever you want. Give me whatever pill.
Exactly. They completely surrender their free will because the burden of agency is too terrifying.
Precisely. And the system relies on this buck passing to maintain its authority.
Okay, what's the second style?
The second negative style identified in this study is procrastination.
Which in a medical context is just ignoring the symptom entirely.
Exactly. The person who finds a lump or has chronic back pain, but the fear of what the hospital will tell them is so paralyzing that they just delay making an appointment for 6 months.
Until the condition is completely catastrophic.
Right. And the third style is perhaps the most dangerous to public health infrastructure. Hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance. Now, in the context of decision-making theory, that doesn't just mean being watchful, right?
No, it means making hasty, panicked, impulsive decisions without evaluating any alternative options, purely to escape the discomfort of uncertainty.
Oh man, I see how this plays out. This is the parent whose toddler has a mild temperature at 2 a.m.
Yep.
They can't tolerate the uncertainty of just waiting to see if it breaks. The hypervigilance kicks in and they rush to the emergency room, demanding an immediate intervention, usually antibiotics, because they need immediate psychological relief from their own fear.
Exactly. Rather than assessing if the child actually faces a severe biological threat.
That makes perfect sense.
And the tragic irony of all this is that the medical system makes people feel deeply inadequate or unintelligent for falling into these psychological traps. The patient thinks, I don't understand these lab results, therefore I must not be smart enough to manage my own health.
Which is a complete fallacy. And it reminds me of an incredible analogy we can draw from another source in our stack, the YouTube lecture breaking down Harvard psychologist Howard Gardner's theory of the 9 types of intelligence.
Well, that's a great connection.
Let's explore how society defines intelligence, because it perfectly mirrors how the medical system defines health literacy.
Gardner's theory is a brilliant lens for this. Think about how the modern educational system typically measures a child's intelligence.
It's incredibly narrow. The school system primarily tests and rewards really only 2 types. Linguistic intelligence, which is how well you can read, write, and manipulate vocabulary.
And logical, mathematical intelligence.
Right, how well you can solve abstract equations and recognize numerical patterns. And if a child happens to be a prodigy in those two specific areas, they are labeled a genius.
But what about the other 7?
Exactly. What if a child is a genius in spatial intelligence? They can visualize and manipulate 3D objects in their mind like an architect. Or musical intelligence, or interpersonal intelligence, which is the ability to deeply read and navigate the emotions of other people.
The school system usually ignores those talents.
Mm.
Or worse, labels the child as slow or not smart simply because their genius doesn't fit the standardized testing matrix.
It's the classic proverb, right?
Yeah.
Judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
Right. So let's map Gardner's theory directly onto our healthcare discussion. Gardner identified bodily kinesthetic intelligence.
Which is the capacity to learn through physical movement and deep intuition of the physical self.
Yes. And he also identified naturalistic intelligence, the ability to read and categorize the subtle patterns and shifts in the natural environment.
And for thousands of years, traditional healers and just human beings in general survived entirely by relying on high levels of bodily kinesthetic and naturalistic intelligence.
This is the very definition of Dr. Srivatsa's concept of body literacy. It is the profound, intuitive ability to read your own physical ecosystem, to know what a specific type of fatigue means.
To feel the difference between like a minor viral ache and a deep bacterial infection.
But the modern Rockefeller-influenced medical system completely discarded that. Just like the school system convinces a brilliant artist they are stupid because they can't do calculus, the medical system convinces highly intuitive people they are medically illiterate.
Simply because they don't possess advanced logical and linguistic intelligence regarding complex pharmaceutical chemistry or highly specific blood panel data.
Right. They replaced intuitive body literacy with what the sources describe as statistical morality.
Okay, explain the mechanics of statistical morality. What does that actually look like in a real consultation room?
Statistical morality is the reduction of a complex, living, breathing human being into an isolated set of data points.
Just numbers on a page.
It's the doctor looking at a BMI number, a cholesterol metric, and a blood pressure reading on a pre-printed 5-minute consultation checklist, and making a sweeping judgment about your health without ever actually looking you in the eye.
It strips all the context away.
Completely. The physician, pressured by bureaucratic time constraints and legal liabilities, doesn't have the time or the incentive to listen to the story of the illness.
The story of the illness.
Yeah, how the patient emotionally and physically experienced the onset of the symptoms. They just treat the data point. It destroys the relational ethics of healing.
There's a direct quote from Dr. Srivatsa from a 1996 British medical journal paper included in our materials that perfectly captures this tragedy. He wrote, "Every person who seeks professional help tells a story of illness as they have lived, experienced, and remember it. The duty of a doctor is to listen and offer a solution, not a prescription."
When a system abandons that duty, when it ignores the story, relies purely on statistical morality, and leverages patient fear to drive pharmaceutical consumption, it doesn't just create philosophical harm.
No, it creates catastrophic biological consequences.
And this leads us to the most terrifying reality discussed in our sources, the inevitable consequence of this overprescribing fear-based model.
We are talking about a literal ticking time bomb. Let's move into the crisis of antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, the rise of the superbug.
This is where the profound social inequalities and the failure of the doctor-centered system collide in a way that threatens the entire human species.
Antimicrobial resistance is not some future theoretical problem anymore, is it?
No, it is a current compounding catastrophe.
Let's lay out the raw statistics from the public health reports because they are genuinely hard to fathom. Right now, as we sit here, AMR causes approximately 700,000 deaths annually around the globe.
Which is already a huge number.
But the projections for the near future are apocalyptic. By the year 2050, if we do not fundamentally alter our approach to healthcare, that number is expected to hit 10 million deaths every single year.
Some models in the documents even warn of up to 16 million deaths globally without immediate intervention.
And the collateral damage to human civilization goes far beyond mortality. The economic toll is just staggering. The global economy faces between $1 trillion and $3.4 trillion in annual gross domestic product losses by 2030.
Because you have a massive segment of the population that is simply too sick to work.
And another massive segment that has to drop out of the workforce just to act as full-time caregivers. The productivity of entire nations simply collapses.
And the timeline is incredibly compressed. The sources state that we are currently sitting at a 42% antimicrobial resistance rate today.
Wait, 42%. What does that actually mean in practice?
It means that almost half the time we deploy our frontline chemical weapons against a bacterial infection, the bacteria simply shrug it off.
They've already mutated.
They've mutated and adapted. And because of that terrifying 42% threshold, epidemiological models suggest we are literally only 6 to 8 years away from a functional collapse of modern healthcare infrastructure.
6 to 8 years.
We are staring down the barrel of a post-antibiotic era.
A post-antibiotic era. I really need to emphasize what that actually means for the average person. It means that routine medical procedures we take completely for granted, a standard C-section for a pregnant mother, a knee replacement surgery for an elderly man, or, even a basic dental extraction become potentially lethal events.
Because we won't be able to stop the secondary infections that inevitably follow those procedures.
But why are we here? How did the bacteria outsmart a century of multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical research?
Because of the psychological mechanics we just spent the last 20 minutes unpacking. We are overprescribing antibiotics at an industrial scale because of fear.
Because of that hypervigilance.
You have a population of terrified patients who lack body literacy, experiencing hypervigilance. They rush to the clinic for a viral cold, demanding a pill to alleviate their anxiety.
But the doctor knows it's a virus. The doctor went to medical school for a decade. They know antibiotics don't kill viruses, so why do they write the prescription? Don't they have an ethical obligation to say no?
This is where you have to look at the bureaucratic environment the doctor is trapped inside. They have been stripped of their true clinical independence. They are operating under a deeply flawed administrative concept known as safety netting.
Safety netting. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a positive clinical protocol, keeping the patient safe from falling through the cracks, right?
Originally it was. If a doctor sends a patient home but says, if your fever spikes above 103 degrees tonight, go straight to the emergency room, that is a clinical safety net.
Sounds reasonable.
But the sources reveal how modern hospital administrations and legal departments weaponize this concept. In today's medical bureaucracy, safety netting has morphed into the aggressive generation of a massive paper trail specifically designed to protect the hospital trust from litigation.
Oh, I see. So it's not about protecting the biology of the patient. It's about protecting the liability of the institution.
Exactly. Let's look at the legal mechanics. Imagine a doctor refuses an antibiotic to 10,000 patients with a sore throat, knowing 9,999 of them have a harmless virus.
Okay.
But one patient happens to have an aggressive bacterial infection, suffers severe complications, and sues the hospital. The hospital's legal team is enraged. They demand protocols to ensure they are never legally exposed again.
So the administration implicitly tells the doctors, just prescribe the antibiotic to everyone, order the expensive MRI, check every single box on the form.
Yes. It is financially and legally cheaper for the institution to practice extreme defensive medicine than to risk a lawsuit.
That is maddening.
And if a principal doctor, like Dr. Srivatsa, stands up and points out that this systemic negligence is causing a massive public health crisis by breeding superbugs, the institution attacks the whistleblower.
Because admitting the whistleblower is right would invite massive class action lawsuits for past negligence.
It is easier to neutralize the complaining doctor than to fix the foundational rot of the system.
So we have a system where terrified patients demand drugs, terrified doctors prescribe them to avoid lawsuits, and the bacteria just sit there, mutating and getting stronger, while the global healthcare ship slowly sinks.
Perfect storm.
So how are the massive institutions trying to fix this hole in the hull? Let's analyze the UK NICE model detailed in our sources.
NICE stands for the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the United Kingdom. Recognizing the AMR crisis, they launched what they called a Global First pilot project between 2022 and 2024.
Let's walk through the mechanics of this project. They set up a subscription-style contract model. Essentially, the UK National Health Service is paying massive pharmaceutical companies a fixed, guaranteed annual fee that is completely delinked from the volume of drugs actually prescribed or used. They are doing this for new reserve antibiotics like ceftazidime with avibactam and ceftriaxone.
The economic logic is that they need to incentivize pharma companies to invent new antibiotics.
Because right now, it takes $1 billion to invent a new antibiotic. But because responsible doctors are supposed to hold it in reserve and rarely use it, the pharma company can't make their money back through traditional sales volume.
Right. On paper, to an economist, It sounds like a perfectly logical fix. Pay the pharmaceutical giants a massive subscription fee regardless of sales, so they have the guaranteed capital to keep researching and inventing new weapons against the superbugs.
But Dr. Srivatsa presented a devastating critique of this model at a superbug conference in London.
His critique gets right to the heart of the delusion. What is the fundamental flaw in the UK NICE model?
It's the firefighter analogy. Imagine your living room is on fire because a serial arsonist is standing there throwing gasoline on the rug.
Okay.
The government's solution is to pay the fire department a multi-million-dollar subscription fee to invent a slightly better, more high-tech fire hose. Meanwhile, they completely ignore the arsonist who is still standing in the living room.
Governments and pharmaceutical companies are pouring billions into inventing another antibiotic while totally ignoring the root cause of why the antibiotics are failing in the first place.
Exactly. If you do not change the underlying mechanics, the loss of body literacy, the panic-driven clinic visits, the fear-based demands from patients, and the defensive liability-driven prescribing by doctors the arsonist is still there.
As soon as you introduce that shiny new billion-dollar antibiotic into the ecosystem, the same broken system will overprescribe it.
And within 3 to 5 years, the bacteria will mutate, become resistant to the new drug, and you are right back where you started, just billions of dollars poorer.
We don't just need new chemicals. We need a fundamental behavioral and systemic intervention. We need to stop the spread of these infections at the local community level before they ever reach a hospital.
Which brings us to the technological crossroads of this entire issue.
It does, and a very common reaction when people realize the human bureaucratic system is broken is to look toward Silicon Valley.
Right. I know listeners are thinking this. Okay, the human doctors are overworked, terrified of lawsuits, and trapped in a corrupt system. We live in the future. Why don't we just bypass the humans and hand this massive data problem over to big tech? Why don't we just use massive artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT or Google Gemini to triage patients and fix healthcare?
It is a seductive idea, but our sources on the absolute bleeding edge of AI development demonstrate why that assumption is fundamentally flawed and incredibly dangerous in a medical context.
Let's deeply explore the YouTube source on the AI researchers because this completely blew my mind.
It's fascinating research.
A coalition of researchers from top-tier institutions, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, published a paper in March 2025 that basically shook the foundational assumptions of the entire artificial intelligence industry. They discovered a critical mathematical flaw in how large language models, or LLMs, actually operate.
To understand the flaw, you have to understand the prevailing dogma in big tech. The assumption has always been that scaling up the training data automatically makes an AI smarter, more capable, and more precise.
The business model is essentially just build a bigger server farm and feed the AI more of the internet.
But these researchers prove that is mathematically false. Let's walk through their experiment. They used an open source model called OM1B, which is a model containing 1 billion parameters.
Okay.
They decided to train 2 separate versions of it to test the scaling theory. They trained one version on 2.3 trillion tokens of data.
And the other.
They trained the second version on 3 trillion tokens.
Now, common sense dictates that the AI that read 3 trillion pieces of information should completely crush the AI that only read 2.3 trillion, right?
But the empirical results showed the exact opposite. The massive version, trained on 3 trillion tokens, actually underperformed the smaller model by up to 3% across standard benchmarks after a process called instruction tuning.
I need you to break that down. What actually happens to the internal architecture of an AI's brain when you force-feed it that much data? How does knowing more make it worse at its job?
The researchers identified a mathematical inflection point, right around 2.5 trillion tokens. When you push a model past that threshold, it suffers from a phenomenon they termed catastrophic overtraining, leading to progressive sensitivity.
Progressive sensitivity. Give me an analogy to understand that mechanism.
Think of it like training a master chef. If you teach a chef 1,000 highly curated recipes, they deeply internalize the foundational principles of flavor, heat, and chemistry. They become adaptable.
Makes sense.
But suppose you force that chef to memorize 3 trillion random, unverified recipes from every corner of the internet, including bizarre Reddit posts, historically inaccurate cookbooks, and conflicting instructions.
That's just noise.
Exactly. Their brain becomes so overwhelmed, so rigidly locked into finding statistical averages across all that noise, that if you ask them to do a simple, precise downstream task, like just perfectly boiling a single egg, they freeze. You lose their balance. That is progressive sensitivity. The AI's internal parameters become incredibly fragile.
So if you take a massive corporate black box AI that has scraped 10 trillion random internet tokens, everything from Wikipedia articles on quantum physics to angry Twitter arguments to fantasy novels, and you try to fine-tune it to give precise life or death medical triage guidance,
It is fundamentally unreliable.
it might hallucinate a treatment because it statistically conflated a medical journal with a piece of science fiction. It's too fragile.
Exactly. The sheer volume of irrelevant noise degrades its ability to perform highly specific critical reasoning. And this is why Dr. Srivatsa's AI innovation, Dr. Maya GPT, is architecturally and philosophically completely different from these overtrained corporate monoliths.
This is a vital distinction to make. Dr. Maya GPT is not a generic large language model fed on trillions of random internet tokens.
No, it is a closed, highly specialized, purpose-built system. Its foundation is strictly and exclusively built upon 50 years of verified clinical diagnostic experience, primarily in pediatrics and acute care.
So it's not guessing based on Reddit.
It doesn't guess the next word based on internet statistics. It evaluates biological realities.
And it operates on a very specific, unyielding principle. The body never lies.
Which perfectly brings us back to the concept of body literacy and those multiple intelligences we discussed. Dr. Maya doesn't rely on statistical language probability. It uses a clinical mechanism called combinatorial pattern recognition.
Let me see if I'm following this mechanism. It's relying on the triad of symptoms, correct? Walk me through how a doctor or an AI trained by a doctor actually looks at a triad of symptoms compared to just isolated data points.
In deep clinical medicine, diseases do not present as isolated random events. They present in highly specific sequences and patterns. If you take a child into an emergency room, a master pediatrician doesn't just look at the thermometer reading of a fever and make a decision based on that one data point.
Because that would be statistical morality.
Right. They look at the fever, combined with the exact respiratory rate, combined with the neurological state of lethargy or irritability in the child. It is similar to the pediatric assessment triangle used in emergency medicine.
So it's a combination.
It is the specific combination, the sequence, and the timing of those three symptoms that reveals the true nature of the illness.
It reads the story of the illness, not just the statistical data point.
Precisely. Dr. Maya acts as an expert pattern recognizer for these symptom triads.
And I want to pause here and clarify something incredibly important, something the source documents repeat multiple times to ensure there is no misunderstanding. Dr. Maya GPT is not diagnosing the patient.
Important distinction.
It is not prescribing medication. It is not practicing medicine in the traditional sense.
Correct. If it diagnosed or prescribed, it would just be replicating the failures of the centralized allopathic system. Instead, Dr. Maya acts strictly as the gatekeeper of severity.
It takes that complex sequence of symptoms and translates it into a simple, emotionless, color-coded map. And that is so brilliant because it completely short-circuits the panic and anxiety we talked about in the Turkish university study.
Removes the hypervigilance.
The patient doesn't have to navigate complex jargon. They just get clear, objective, color-coded guidance on what to do next based on rock-solid clinical logic.
It restores a level of immediate clarity. But there's a massive logistical hurdle here. Building a brilliant AI is useless if the people who are suffering the most, the billions trapped in the social inequalities of the healthcare system, cannot access it.
Right.
Dr. Srivatsa knew that he couldn't just release Dr. Maya as a smartphone app.
Because an app assumes a tremendous amount of privilege. It assumes the user has a modern smartphone, a reliable data connection, the digital literacy to navigate an app store, and the language skills to read the interface.
Releasing it purely as an app would actively exclude the billions of people who are digitally disenfranchised. And ironically, those are the exact populations most vulnerable to the compounding effects of the AMR superbug crisis.
So, to solve the inequality problem, he had to build a physical Raj. He built hardware. And this brings us to the Prema Kiosk.
Prema.
Yeah, Prema stands for personal, reliable, empowering medical advice, though some of the business plans also refer to it as the primary emergency medical assistant. Let's physically describe this machine because it's fascinating.
Imagine the modern, rugged successor to the classic public telephone booth. The Prema Kiosk is a standalone piece of civic street furniture.
The business plan calls it a healthcare ATM, which is a perfect visualization. It's completely weatherproof. It's solar-powered, meaning it can operate in regions with unreliable electrical grids.
That's crucial for rural areas.
It features a large 21-inch touchscreen display and a high-definition camera mounted on an adjustable angle. So if a patient has a severe rash on their leg or wound, they can angle the camera to show the AI exactly what is happening. It even has a built-in thermal printer to generate physical reports for the patient to take with them.
Technologically, it connects to the central Dr. Maya brain via 4G or 5G cellular networks. But crucially, it has built-in offline fallback capabilities.
So it won't just shut down.
No, if the cellular network goes down in a rural area, the core triage logic can still function locally to provide emergency guidance.
But the most revolutionary feature, the one that directly shatters the barrier of inequality, is the multilingual voice-first interface.
It is designed to communicate verbally, recognizing over 30 global languages, including 22 specific Indian regional dialects.
Let's ground this in reality, using the examples from the Quantity and Quality of Human Resources text. The modern private healthcare system inherently discriminates based on wealth and geography. It centralizes incredible resources in wealthy urban centers and completely abandons rural or impoverished areas.
But the Prema Kiosk is engineered specifically for the poor, the illiterate, and the digitally excluded.
Consider the example of an 85-year-old grandmother living in a remote village in rural Karnataka, India. She has never touched a mobile phone in her life. She cannot read or write. Under the current system, she is completely invisible.
She has no access.
But with Prema, she can walk up to a kiosk placed in her village center, physically touch the screen, and simply speak her symptoms aloud in her native, hyper-local dialect. The AI understands her, processes the symptom triad, and speaks back to her in her own language, providing immediate clinical guidance.
Or take the example of a Polish construction worker living in London. He might be experiencing severe chest pains, but he delays seeking care procrastination driven by anxiety because he knows he cannot adequately explain his complex symptoms in English to an overworked NHS doctor.
The language barrier creates a massive disparity in health outcomes.
With the kiosk, he can select Polish, fully articulate the nuances of his pain in his mother tongue, and receive immediate triage. It completely neutralizes the linguistic and educational barriers that historically prevent proper care.
So we have this incredible accessible hardware. Now we have to look at how the Dr. Maya color-coded triage logic actually operates within the kiosk to intercept the superbug crisis.
Okay, let's walk through the color codes. The system outputs one of 4 colors after analyzing the symptom triad. Red is straightforward. It means immediate, life-threatening emergency. The kiosk tells the patient to go straight to accident and emergency, or it helps dispatch an ambulance.
Got it. What about yellow?
Yellow indicates a moderate issue where the patient should speak to a local chemist or pharmacist for over-the-counter management. Green means it is a minor self-limiting issue. The patient receives guidance for self-care at home or is directed to a nurse triage line.
But the most critical code, the one that completely shifts the paradigm of global health, is blue.
The blue code. This is what Dr. Srivatsa refers to as the biological firewall.
Let's dive deep into the mechanism of this biological firewall. When the AI analyzes the triad of symptoms and detects a pattern that strongly suggests a highly contagious or potentially drug-resistant infection, it issues a blue code. What specific instruction does it give the patient?
It gives an explicit, uncompromising instruction. Isolate at home. Seek remote telemedicine advice. Do not, under any circumstances, travel to a hospital or a physical clinic.
And to understand why that is so vital, we have to look at the terrifying reality of what modern hospitals have actually become. The sources state that centralized hospitals are essentially amplification zones for superbugs.
The colonization rates are staggering. The documents cite studies showing that up to 83% of surfaces in certain hospital environments can be colonized by drug-resistant pathogens.
83%.
A hospital is, by definition, a centralized gathering place for the sickest, most infected people in a region.
Let's run a hypothetical scenario to see how the blue code breaks the chain of transmission. Think about the traditional fear-based model we discussed earlier. A patient wakes up feeling terrible. They have a highly contagious, mutating, drug-resistant infection.
Okay.
Because they lack body literacy, the hypervigilance kicks in, they panic, they get on a public bus or a subway, they travel across the city to a centralized clinic or hospital, they walk through the main doors, they sit in a crowded waiting room for 3 hours next to an elderly woman with a compromised immune system and a newborn baby.
Touching everything.
Exactly. They touch the plastic chairs, they flip through the magazines, they touch the bathroom door handles. They are acting as a highly efficient vector, shedding untreatable pathogens everywhere, infecting multiple vulnerable people before a doctor even calls their name.
The centralized model actually facilitates the spread of the superbug, but the Prema Kiosk intercepts this entire disastrous chain of events.
Because the kiosks are decentralized, they are placed in local supermarkets, pharmacies, community centers, post offices, the exact locations where a citizen first realizes they are sick and tries to decide what to do.
By placing the triage mechanism at the community level, Prema stops the superbug at the front door of the healthcare system. It tells the infected vector to go home before they enter the amplification zone of the hospital.
It breaks the physical chain of transmission, and by doing so, it vastly reduces the number of panicked, unnecessary clinic visits that lead to doctors defensively overprescribing antibiotics in the first place. It tackles both the spread of the bacteria and the root cause of the drug resistance simultaneously.
And the power of this system multiplies exponentially when you realize that these kiosks are not operating in isolation. They are connected.
They form a massive, real-time epidemiological surveillance network.
A crowdsourced, artificially intelligent early warning system for global health.
Explain how that surveillance mechanism works compared to our current public health infrastructure, because our current system is pretty slow.
Under the current system, if a novel virus or a new superbug emerges in a community, public health officials don't know about it until patients get sick enough to go to the hospital. Doctors order specific lab cultures, the labs process the samples, and the bureaucratic reporting mechanisms finally flag the anomaly to a central agency.
That process takes weeks.
By which time, the pathogen has already spread globally. But because the Prema kiosks are instantly processing symptom triads at the granular community level, the central Dr. Maya network can detect geographic clusters of specific illnesses in real time.
Just based on the patterns of symptoms people are reporting at the kiosks.
The sources note a staggering statistic. This framework can mathematically identify the onset of a localized epidemic up to 6 full days earlier than standard laboratory confirmation systems.
6 days. When you are dealing with an aggressively mutating superbug or a fast-moving viral pandemic, a 6-day head start is the difference between successful local containment and an uncontrollable global catastrophe.
It is an absolute game changer. And there's one more feature of the kiosk that elegantly addresses a massive social barrier to healthcare: the anonymous mode.
Yes, specifically designed for highly stigmatized diseases, things like multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis or severe sexually transmitted infections.
Under the traditional model, shame is a massive driver of disease transmission. People will actively avoid seeking care because they are terrified of the social stigma. They are ashamed to walk into their local clinic and look their family doctor in the eye and admit their symptoms.
So they hide the illness, and by hiding it, they silently spread it through their community.
The Prema Kiosk includes a free 5-minute anonymous mode. A user can interact with the AI, detail their highly stigmatized symptoms without providing any identifying information, and receive vital triage advice without any fear of community judgment. It completely removes the barrier of human shame from the diagnostic process.
It's an incredibly compassionate, holistic approach to public health. But what I find truly revolutionary about Dr. Srivatsa's vision is that he didn't stop at solving the medical crisis. The Prema project is simultaneously engineered to tackle the deep economic inequalities that the Rockefeller-era system created.
Health inequality and economic inequality are inexorably linked. You cannot solve one without addressing the other.
Let's talk about the economic mechanics of Prema, because it operates on a micro-franchise model. This isn't just a medical device owned by a massive corporation. It is a tool for rapid wealth redistribution.
It operates on a triple-purpose financial model. It generates sustainable commercial revenue. It uses that revenue to subsidize free or low-cost care for the absolute poorest citizens. And crucially, it creates local jobs.
Operating a Prema kiosk creates an entirely new employment category within a community. The community health navigator, sometimes referred to in the documents as a Maya advocate.
Right.
The financial projections in the business plan are remarkable. Because the overhead is so low, a kiosk is projected to pay back its initial capital investment in just 4 days of operation. It offers the local operator a monthly income that is up to 3 times higher than the regional minimum wage.
In a country like India alone, the deployment models project that this micro-franchise system could create over 100,000 localized micro-businesses within a 3-year span.
It literally brings economic vitality directly into the impoverished communities that need it most, rather than extracting wealth to pay a centralized hospital administration. And while it creates wealth for the operator, it simultaneously saves the patient from absolute financial ruin.
The microeconomics for the patient are profound. Let's look at the financial trajectory of a minor illness under the old system versus the Prema system.
The sources give a very clear example. Say a patient gets a blue code on day one from the kiosk. They spend a nominal fee, maybe 300 rupees, for targeted local medication, and they isolate at home. They recover.
A simple, contained event.
If they had not been triaged early, if they had procrastinated due to fear or lack of access, that minor infection could easily have compounded over a week into a catastrophic systemic emergency. They would eventually be rushed to a centralized hospital, resulting in a 1.2 lakh rupee intensive care bill.
For a family living near the poverty line, a 1.2 lakh rupee medical bill is not just a hardship, it is absolute generational financial devastation. It forces them to sell their land, pull their children out of school, and enter a cycle of insurmountable debt.
The kiosk prevents that trajectory entirely. The data suggests it can reduce unnecessary hospital consultations by 70% to 85%.
It is a complete paradigm shift in how we structure society. And as we look at the totality of what Prema and Dr. Maya represent, you realize that this entire technological and economic architecture is rooted in the profound philosophical beliefs of its creator. We touched on Raja Dharma and the cosmic ledger earlier, but I want to really bring this home. The documents reveal something deeply moving about Dr. Srivatsa's personal motivation.
To understand the technology, you have to understand the man. Dr. Srivatsa was not a tech entrepreneur looking for a lucrative startup idea. He was a dedicated clinical physician, and he became a whistleblower.
He witnessed deeply unethical practices within the National Health Service. He saw the systemic negligence, the overprescribing, the environments that bred superbugs. He raised concerns through the proper channels.
And instead of being protected or lauded for his integrity, he was aggressively isolated, professionally silenced, and financially ruined by the very institutions he was trying to improve.
The bureaucratic institutions that harassed and humiliated him operated under the classic fallacy of centralized power, the assumption of invisibility. They believed that because they controlled the funding, the legal departments, and the regulatory boards, no one could hold them accountable. They acted with total impunity.
But as the ancient texts that inspire Dr. Srivatsa argue, the universe maintains a cosmic ledger. Moral bankruptcy is always recorded, and the balance eventually must be restored.
What is truly remarkable is how he responded to that destruction. He did not build Prema and the Dr. Maya AI out of vindictiveness. He didn't spend decades developing this massive, decentralized network to exact petty revenge on the NHS administrators who crushed his career.
He built it because he understood that silence allows cruelty to persist. He built it to fundamentally restore the dharmic balance of power. He realized that true power isn't the authoritarian ability to crush someone beneath you or the capitalist ability to hoard immense wealth by keeping a population locked in a state of fear and biological ignorance.
True power is the unyielding integrity of your own actions, regardless of the institutional forces aligned against you.
There is a quote from the philosophical writings in our sources that just stopped me in my tracks when I read it. It is the defining ethos of this entire project. Treat others with respect, not because of who they are, but because of who you are.
It is a radical, profound inversion of how power traditionally operates in the modern medical-industrial complex.
It really is. When you zoom out and look at all the pieces we've connected today, you see that Dr. Maya and the Prema Kiosks are not just a clever piece of health tech. This is a quiet, powerful revolution. It is a mass movement away from authoritarian, fear-based healthcare toward a truly democratic, patient-centered reality.
It is fundamentally about restoring human free will. It is about giving people back their body literacy, empowering them to make logical, informed choices without the crippling burden of panic.
And it's about breaking the century-old monopoly of institutions that have profited immensely from our dependency.
And from a purely biological survival standpoint, it is about ensuring that when the post-antibiotic era truly arrives, when the superbugs bypass our final chemical defenses, humanity has a decentralized, behavioral and technological firewall already in place to protect itself.
We have covered an unbelievable expanse of ground today. We started by journeying back to the Rockefeller-led industrialization of the 20th century, exploring how the systematic destruction of traditional holistic healing allowed a new medical empire to weaponize fear and statistical morality,
turning sovereign citizens into dependent, lifelong customers.
We examined the deep psychological mechanics of medical anxiety, breaking down the mathematical proof of how trait, anger, and hypervigilance force us to buck past our own free will.
We looked into the terrifying, rapidly approaching reality of antimicrobial resistance, exposing how the bureaucratic terror of institutional safety netting drives doctors to overprescribe.
And why writing a blank check to pharmaceutical companies for new drugs is like handing a firefighter a new hose while completely ignoring the arsonist.
We broke down the hidden architectural flaws of big tech's artificial intelligence models, explaining why feeding trillions of random tokens into an LLM causes catastrophic overtraining and progressive sensitivity, rendering them too fragile for critical medical triage.
And finally, we explored the brilliant, decentralized hope offered by Dr. Maya GPT and the Prema Kiosks. We saw how an AI built strictly on combinatorial pattern recognition and the triad of symptoms can act as a massive biological firewall using the blue code to stop superbugs at the community level while simultaneously creating hundreds of thousands of jobs and redistributing wealth to the most vulnerable populations on Earth.
It is a comprehensive, profoundly ethical blueprint for surviving the next evolution of global health.
It is a blueprint that demands we stop watching passively and start taking our agency back. And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, provocative thought to mull over as you step away from this and go about your day. We started this deep dive talking about the sterile, highly engineered environment of the modern clinic and the anxiety it creates. But if our bodies are constantly speaking to us through precise, interconnected patterns and symptom triads, much like those overlooked spatial or kinesthetic geniuses we discussed, who process the world differently than a standardized test demands, what vital, screaming signals are you currently ignoring in your own body, simply because you've been trained your entire life to outsource your trust to a system that profits immensely from your uncertainty?
It is a question that requires deep, uncomfortable introspection from all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the plunge into this deep dive with us today. Take care of yourselves and listen to the story your body is telling you.